What would you do if a stranger screamed on your dock and claimed she owned your lake? A woman screamed in my face on my family's dock and claimed I was trespassing on community water. Soon the whole neighborhood turned on me. Meetings, rules, accusations. But they didn't know the truth. I owned the entire lake, and the moment that truth surfaced, her whole HOA empire began to crumble. The first morning back at my grandfather's lakeside cabin felt almost unreal, like stepping into an old photograph. The air held that crisp, early mountain smell of pine needles warming under the sun, mixed with the earthy scent of damp soil still holding the chill of night. My boots creaked softly against the old wooden planks of the curved dock, each board familiar enough to stir memories I hadn't touched in decades. Ranger padded beside me, tail wagging slowly as he sniffed the air, taking in the quiet morning as if he remembered this place too. The lake lay still, glassy, turquoise, and impossibly calm. So calm that the reflections of the evergreen trees looked more solid than the trees themselves. The first cast of my fishing line cut across the stillness with a soft whistle, its ripples stretching out like a slow breath. I sat down on the edge of the dock, feeling the wood warm beneath me as the sun climbed. After years of city noise, water treatment sites, and deadlines stacked higher than dam walls, the quiet pressed gently around me. It felt like the lake was welcoming me home. Ranger settled at my feet, his brown eyes soft, chin resting on my boot. If there was ever a moment that told me returning here had been the right decision, it was that one. Just me, my dog, the dock my grandfather had built with his own hands, and a lake that didn't ask anything from me except presence. But peace in this place, as I would soon learn, wasn't something you got to keep for long. At first, it was just a distant crunch of gravel, out of place in the morning stillness. Ranger's ears perked up before I even turned. The sound grew sharper, faster. He rose to a low growl, staring up the hill toward the cabin. I followed his gaze. A woman in a bright pink dress was striding down my path, with the force of a storm rolling downhill. The dress snapped in the breeze as if even the wind was trying to get out of her way. Her blonde hair bounced with each step, though bounced might be too gentle a word, more like shook with the fury that propelled her forward. She clutched a tablet tight against her chest and jabbed the air ahead of her with her free hand like she was puncturing invisible arguments. "Hey, you!" she shouted, voice slicing across the lake so sharply that even the birds quieted. My first thought was that she must be lost. My second was that no one lost approached a stranger with that much rage. I stood slowly, fishing rod in hand. "Morning," I offered, though it came out more hesitant than friendly. She didn't return the greeting. If anything, my politeness enraged her further. She marched straight down the dock, heels clacking like a countdown, until she stood inches from my face. The turquoise lake shimmered behind her, but all I could see were wide, furious eyes and a mouth pulled so tight it looked painful. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed. "Fishing," I said. "On my dock." "This—" She whumped, thrust her finger toward the water, then toward me. "Is community lake property. You are trespassing, and fishing without a lake HOA permit is a violation." I blinked at her. "Lake HOA?" She squared her shoulders. "Yes, the Lake Homeowners Association. And I am President, Bethany Reed. You are using restricted waterfront without authorization." I tried to process this. My grandfather had lived here before most of the cabins around the lake even existed. In all the years I'd visited, nobody had mentioned a lake HOA, much less one with the power to issue violations. "Ma'am," I said carefully, "I've paid property taxes on this lake for years. I own this shoreline and this dock. She cut me off with a shout so sharp, Ranger lunged forward, barking. You do not own the water. That lake belongs to the community, and you will join the HOA immediately or face legal consequences." "Legal?" I started. "Yes." She jabbed a finger so close to my nose I could feel the breeze off it. "You will sign the HOA membership contract today, or I will be forced to escalate. Community standards must be upheld." Up the hillside, a movement caught my eye. A sheriff's patrol truck sat parked near my fence line. Officer Bennett leaned against the hood, watching silently. No urgency, no concern, just an exhausted resignation, like he'd dealt with this woman more times than he cared to admit. I lifted my hands slightly. "Look, I don't know what authority you think you have, but this lake is—" She screamed over me. "Do not question my authority. You are already in violation. And if you refuse to sign, I will call the sheriff and file a trespassing report." "He's already here," I muttered. She whipped around, waving both arms in the air. "Officer, this man is illegally occupying community water resources." Officer Bennett didn't move. His shoulders slumped a little, though, like he was already regretting being on duty. I stared at her, the absurdity cutting through my irritation like cold wind. "Lady," I said, "I grew up on this dock. My grandfather built it. This land is in my deed." Her lips curled into a smile that held no warmth at all. "We'll see about that." She spun on her heel, storming back up the dock, heels hammering each plank with theatrical fury. Halfway up the path, she turned and shouted, "You've been warned, Mr. Cole. This lake is not yours." Ranger barked again, louder this time, echoing her retreating footsteps. I let out a long breath, staring across the turquoise water as it rippled softly under a breeze that hadn't been there a moment ago. My peace was gone, chased away by a woman in pink who yelled about imaginary authority. "Why?" I said to no one but the lake. "Is she so desperate to control a lake she clearly doesn't own?" The reflection on the water shimmered faintly. My dog. My dock. The mountains behind us. A place I knew, a place I trusted. But now, doubt crept in like cold seeping through old wood. Why did she call the cops over a lake I've paid taxes on for years? The question followed me all the way back to the cabin, like an unwelcome shadow. I hung my jacket on the old antler hook beside the door, listening to the kettle begin its slow whistle on the stove. Ranger circled twice near the hearth, uneasy, as if he sensed the shift in the air better than I did. I tried to shake off the encounter, but her voice, sharp, loud, entitled, kept echoing through the stillness of the place that had always been my sanctuary. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the steam rising in soft curls, but before I could take a sip, Ranger's low growl rumbled again. His paws clicked urgently across the wooden floor as he rushed toward the window. I followed his gaze. Bethany Reed was back. This time she wasn't marching. She was advancing, like someone carrying out an official inspection on land she believed belonged to her. Her bright pink dress flashed between the trees, almost too vivid for the calm morning light. She held a clipboard pressed to her chest and a rolled-up stack of papers under her arm. Her heels stabbed the gravel with the same fury as before. I opened the door before she could knock. "Mr. Cole," she said, not bothering with a greeting, "we need to address your non-compliance." "I've lived here one day," I replied. "Exactly," she snapped, "which means you're already behind." Behind on what? I didn't ask. It wouldn't have mattered. She shoved the papers into my chest with enough force to slosh my coffee over the rim. "These," she declared, "are your Lake HOA membership documents. Mandatory for all shoreline occupants. $180 per month, plus a $200 initiation fee." I stared at her, then at the stack of papers. "I'm not joining an HOA. You don't have a choice." Her smile tightened. This lake is managed by the community. Your use of the dock, shoreline, and water is subject to HOA oversight and fee structures. Ranger barked once. Sharp, protective. She flinched, but only for a second, then glared at him like even the dog was personally offending her. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me so Ranger wouldn't get riled up. "Look, Ms. Reed, President Reed," she corrected instantly. I exhaled. "Fine, President Reed. What gives your HOA authority over this lake?" She looked almost triumphant as she tapped the top page. "It's all outlined here. We maintain the water quality, the shoreline safety, the dock inspections, everything, and everyone who benefits pays their fair share." I flipped the first page. It was dense with legal language, the kind designed to intimidate instead of inform. But something caught my eye immediately. A clause claiming HOA oversight over all water within a 3-mile radius. 3 miles. There wasn't a lake in this state with an HOA radius that absurd. "This doesn't look legitimate," I said quietly. Her nostrils flared. "Are you accusing me of lying?" "I didn't say that." "You implied it?" she shot back. "And for your information, these contracts have been approved by our board." "Who's on the board?" She hesitated, just for a heartbeat, but long enough for the cold knot in my stomach to tighten. "That is not your concern," she said, chin rising. "It is," I replied, "if you're demanding money from me." She stepped closer, the gravel crunching under her heels. "Sign the papers, Mr. Cole. That's the simplest path." "And if I don't?" She flashed a look so confident it bordered on smug. "Then I'll proceed with formal violations. And trust me, those will add up very quickly." I held her gaze. "I paid property taxes on this lake. I've reviewed the deed. I know what I own." Her smile vanished as quickly as frost in heat. "Ownership of a structure does not mean ownership of the water. That belongs to the community, and I enforce the rules." I opened my mouth to argue, but 2 neighbors walked by on the road, heads down, steps fast, avoiding eye contact. One of them, a man in a denim jacket, shot me a glance so nervous it almost looked apologetic before hurrying away. They were afraid of her. That alone told me more than any contract could. Bethany snapped her clipboard shut. "This is your final warning. Sign the documents today, or I escalate." "I'm not signing." She leaned in so close I could see the small crack in her lipstick. "Then you're already in violation." Ranger erupted in a growl so deep it made the boards beneath us vibrate. She recoiled, then pointed at him as if preparing to add my dog to some imaginary violation list. "You will regret this decision," she said coldly. "I'll notify the community." She turned sharply and walked back toward the trees, heels carving harsh little holes in the gravel. At the end of the driveway, she looked back at me with eyes full of warning. "You should have just paid your fees, Mr. Cole." And then she was gone, swallowed by the forest path. I looked down at the stack of documents in my hands. The paper felt too heavy, its weight carrying something more than ink, pressure, intimidation, maybe even fraud. Ranger nudged my leg, unsettled. "I know, boy," I murmured. "I know." I carried the papers to the porch table and flipped through them again. The language was sloppy, inconsistent. Some sections looked like they'd been copied from unrelated municipal guidelines. And that 3-mile water jurisdiction, no legitimate HOA would ever draft something like that. What is she hiding behind her fake authority? The lake shimmered quietly in the distance, innocent, unaware of the battle starting to unfold around it. But as I stared at the forged-looking claws again, one truth settled hard in my chest. Bethany Reed wasn't just misinformed. She wasn't confused. She was building something controlling, something false. And she expected me to fall in, line like everyone else. The thought clung to me as Ranger and I walked down to the dock later that afternoon. The sun hung low enough to cast long ripples of gold across the water, the kind of light that usually brought peace to this place. But even the lake felt different now, as if the surface tension carried something heavier than wind, like the whole shoreline was holding its breath, waiting for whatever this HOA president would do next. I checked the buoy markers I'd placed earlier in the week, simple, bright orange floats meant for safety and orientation. My grandfather had trained me in water mapping and hazard marking before I was old enough to drive. Those buoys had nothing to do with an HOA and everything to do with what kept this lake safe. But now every ripple around them looked suspicious, like the lake itself had become evidence in someone else's narrative. Ranger stiffened before I did. A soft whine escaped him, his body leaning toward the tree line. That's when I noticed the first one, an orange surveyor flag sticking out of the ground right beside my dock gate. Its bright color glowed like a warning flare in the fading light. Then I saw another, and another. Half a dozen flags dotted the shoreline, stuck in places that made no sense. Some marked property far outside my boundary. Others were planted right inside my fence line, as if someone had walked circles around the cabin during the night, randomly stabbing flags into the earth without understanding what a survey marker even was. I crouched to pick up the nearest one. The wood was fresh, no weathering, no dirt on the bottom. Recently planted. Very recently. "Who the hell?" I murmured. Behind me, gravel shifted on the path. I turned to see a couple, neighbors, though I didn't yet know their names, walking quickly past with their heads down. They didn't make eye contact. They didn't wave. They acted like passing too close to my property might get them in trouble with someone. The man kept his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, shoulders hunched. The woman whispered something to him without lifting her gaze. They looked scared. Maybe not of me, but of being seen talking to me. Something twisted in my chest. I'd moved here to breathe again, to clear my head, to rebuild, not to become the neighborhood pariah. A soft click sounded near the old wooden gate. I stepped toward it and found a laminated notice taped to the crossbeam. Red block letters glared up at me. Temporary shoreline closure violation pending, authorized by Lake HOA. Below that, a signature in looping handwriting, Bethany Reed. I tore the paper from the gate. It came off too easily, like she expected it to be removed and replaced again and again. Ranger barked once sharply, as if echoing my frustration. I checked the road. A pickup truck rolled by slowly, too slowly. The driver kept his eyes forward, but his head tilted just enough to see my yard. Then, as if guilty for looking, he sped up. Word was spreading. Whatever Bethany had told them was already sinking in. The pressure was subtle at first, like a draft creeping in through an old window. A sideways glance here. A whispered conversation there. People pausing when I walked past. People turning away as if we'd never met. Then came the emails. The first arrived in my inbox that evening. The sender's name was Community Watch, though there was no signature, no phone number, no accountability. The subject line read, "Concern about your water activity." The body wasn't much better. "You are preventing equal lake access," it claimed. "You are blocking shoreline easements. You are refusing to cooperate with the community." It ended with, "Failure to comply will escalate consequences." I stared at the screen. None of it was true. None of it made sense. But someone, likely Bethany, was using anonymous accounts to push a narrative. I deleted the message. 5 minutes later, another arrived, then another. Different email names, same wording, same accusations, same chilling undertone. By the 5th message, Ranger growled at the sound of the notification ping. I shut the laptop and walked out onto the porch, needing open air. The cabin door clicked behind me, echoing too loudly in the dusk. Crickets hummed in the underbrush. A faint wind swept down from the ridge, carrying the scent of pine resin and distant wood smoke. But the lake, the place that always calmed me, felt tense, as if the water itself sensed the change. A flashlight beam flickered across the far side of the shoreline. Someone was moving near my boundary. At first I thought it might be a hiker, but the pattern was too uniform. Step, pause, plant. Step, pause, plant. Another surveyor flag. My jaw tightened. I walked closer to the property line, raising my voice just enough to carry across the quiet. "Can I help you with something?" The figure startled, nearly dropping their flag. A thin man in a windbreaker turned halfway toward me but kept his head low. Just marking boundaries," he muttered. "Whose boundaries?" He didn't answer, just hurried away, flag bundle tucked under his arm like contraband. Ranger sprinted a few yards after him before stopping at the edge of the dock, tail stiff and alert. When the man disappeared into the trees, I exhaled a long, steady breath. The cold knot in my stomach tightened further. This wasn't random. It wasn't the work of well-meaning neighbors. It was organized, coordinated, and driven entirely by Bethany's influence. As the last color drained from the sunset, I looked down at the torn closure notice in my hand. The laminated surface reflected the porch light, shining like a warning. Is everyone convinced by her lies, or afraid to question her? I didn't know the answer, but I knew I wasn't her first target, and if I didn't push back soon, I wouldn't be her last. The next morning felt wrong before it even began. The lake was too quiet. Even the birds seemed to keep their distance, their songs faint and uncertain. Ranger stuck close to my side, pacing instead of lounging, his own signal that something was stirring in the woods, something that didn't belong here. I found out what it was soon enough. At 9 a.m., engines rumbled down the narrow road leading toward the marina. More vehicles than I'd seen since moving back rolled past. Sedans, SUVs, even a couple of golf carts decorated with HOA decals. The steady crunch of tires on gravel echoed off the water, bouncing from ridge to ridge like the sound was trying to warn the whole valley. Ranger and I walked down the path that followed the shoreline. Through the trees, I saw movement near the marina, bright banners being hung, folding chairs unfolding like a swarm of metal insects, and a portable podium positioned at the center of the dock, as if someone were preparing to address a crowd. Bethany Reed's voice cracked across the air long before she appeared. "Chairs in rows, not clusters. This is an official community proceeding." Proceeding, not meeting, not gathering. Proceeding. That alone sent a cold shiver through me. I stepped out of the trees and onto the gravel clearing, just as a group of neighbors turned to look at me. Some faces were familiar, people I'd nodded at during morning walks. But their expressions now were careful, guarded, like they weren't sure if acknowledging me would put them on a list. At the center of the dock stood Bethany, bright pink dress billowing dramatically in the lakeside breeze. She was flanked by two board members I'd never seen before, both with clipboards, both standing with military straight spines like they were preparing for a ceremony. Next to them stood a lawyer in a charcoal suit, flipping through a binder thick enough to choke a filing cabinet. And behind them, the turquoise lake shimmered in the morning sun, calm, indifferent, ancient. "Mr. Cole!" Bethany called out, her amplified voice carrying through a battery-powered speaker. "So glad you could join us. The community deserves clarity." I exhaled slowly. This was far bigger than a disagreement over buoys now. She had staged an entire public spectacle, with props, staff, and a captive audience. "What is all this?" I asked, stepping onto the dock. The boards groaned beneath me, their familiar weight grounding me for just a second. Bethany clasped her hands together, like she'd been waiting for that question. This is an emergency lake meeting to address your ongoing violations and your refusal to comply with the lake HOA. I don't belong to your HOA, I said calmly. You don't get to choose, she replied, smile tight as braided wire. Everyone living on or benefiting from lakefront property is automatically under HOA jurisdiction. The lawyer beside her cleared his throat and tapped the binder. This association has documentation. I crossed my arms. Documentation of what exactly? Bethany lifted a laminated chart and spun it toward the crowd. Illegal dock expansion, she declared. Unauthorized buoy placement, interference with shared shoreline access, and based on witness reports, refusal to participate in community maintenance requirements. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Someone whispered, I thought he'd been blocking the launch ramp. Another added, my cousin said he tore down a footpath sign. None of it was true, but rumors spread faster than facts, especially when fed by someone like Bethany. She motioned toward the chairs. We will hear from the board, our legal advisor, and then from Mr. Cole. Please remain respectful. Respectful wasn't the word I'd use for what followed. Bethany's lawyer stepped forward and opened his binder. He spoke with the kind of polished authority that made even nonsense sound official. According to Article 6 of the Supplemental Shoreline Code, he began, any individual obstructing community waters may be subject to penalties, including, but not limited to, access suspension, property evaluation, and community enforcement. Community enforcement. The phrase felt engineered to intimidate. He projected several documents onto a portable screen. Photos appeared, zoomed-in shots of my buoys, selectively framed angles of my dock, even a grainy picture of me kneeling beside the shoreline. In each image, the context was twisted, the perspective manipulated. What had been safety markers now looked like barriers. What had been routine maintenance now looked like alteration. I felt a hollow weight settle in my chest. Ranger pressed against my leg, sensing the shift. When it was my turn to speak, I stepped toward the podium. The air felt thick, heavy with expectation or judgment. I couldn't quite tell which. I didn't obstruct anything, I said. The dock is as my grandfather built it. The buoys are safety precautions, and I've never blocked access to the water. Bethany raised her hand like a schoolteacher stopping a misbehaving child. Intent is irrelevant, she announced. Impact is what matters, and your presence is disrupting community harmony. I stared at her. Community harmony? She nodded solemnly. You've caused confusion, fear, and disorder. People don't feel safe with undocumented boundaries. I almost laughed. Boundaries you created. A hush swept over the audience. The lawyer closed his binder with a decisive thud. Bethany's smile froze, then faltered. Just a hair. For 10 seconds, 10 long, suffocating seconds, the entire dock fell silent. The breeze stilled. The banners stopped fluttering. Even the lake seemed to pause. In that silence, pure and heavy, I felt it. The community had turned against me. Then someone shifted in their seat, and the moment broke like thin ice cracking under weight. Bethany leaned toward the sheriff, Marcus Hale, who had appeared at the edge of the gathering without me noticing. He stood with arms crossed, unreadable. She whispered urgently to him, gesturing toward me and then toward the dock. Was she trying to convince him to shut it down? To enforce her authority? Her voice rose just enough for me to hear. He is refusing compliance. We need intervention. My stomach tightened. Is she really about to force the sheriff to shut down my dock? Sheriff Marcus Hale stood with his boots planted firmly on the edge of the dock, arms crossed over his chest as he listened. He didn't nod. He didn't answer. He just watched her with the steady patience of someone who'd already been dragged into too many neighborhood feuds and wasn't eager to add another. But Bethany leaned in closer, whispering faster, gesturing sharply toward me as if trying to will him into action. The crowd shifted behind us, whispers crawling like wind through dry grass. Chairs scraped. Someone coughed. Someone else muttered, "He shouldn't even be living by the lake if he's not going to follow the rules." The words pricked at my skin, sharp and unwelcome. These were people I hadn't even met yet, already convinced I was the problem. Sheriff Hale finally raised one hand, slow, deliberate. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying just enough authority to cut through the murmurs. "This looks like a civil matter, not a criminal one." Bethany's face froze in disbelief. "Civil? He's violating community codes." "Community codes aren't criminal statutes," the sheriff replied calmly. "If you want this resolved, you two need to go through proper channels, not emergency meetings." Her jaw twitched. She wasn't used to being told no. "You saw what he's done. The buoys, the dock, I saw a man fishing on his own shoreline," he said. A few neighbors gasped. Bethany slapped her binder shut, glaring at him as if he'd betrayed her personally. But the sheriff didn't flinch. He tipped his hat in my direction and walked off the dock, boots thudding lightly as he headed back toward the parking lot. The silence he left behind wasn't peaceful. It was charged, heavy, accusatory. Bethany spun toward me. "This isn't over." Her voice trembled with restrained fury. "I never thought it was," I said, though my words came out more tired than defiant. She gathered her paperwork, her lawyer trailing behind her like a reluctant shadow. The crowd broke apart slowly, a tide of suspicion moving around me like I was a rock disrupting the current. Some people avoided my eyes. Others stared too long, measuring me against whatever story Bethany had fed them. When they were gone, only the lake remained. Quiet, shimmering, indifferent. Ranger nudged my knee, sensing something deeper than frustration settling in my chest. I knelt beside him, running my hand across his fur. "We're in something bigger than a yelling match now," I murmured. "And we're going to need proof. Real proof." The sun was dipping behind the ridge by the time I returned to the cabin. The logs glowed softly in the fading light, their rough surfaces warm with memory. My grandfather had built this place alone, hauling timber up from the valley, shaping every corner with care and stubborn pride. The cabin wasn't big, but it had strength. It had history. And somewhere in that history might be the answers needed. Inside, dust swirled in the slanted evening light like 1,000 lazy fireflies. The old cedar floorboards creaked under my boots as I crossed the room to the trapdoor near the back wall. My grandfather's voice echoed faintly in my memory. "Everything worth keeping goes in the basement, Remy. Everything worth knowing gets written down." I pulled the strap and lifted the door. Cold air breathed up from the darkness below. With a flashlight in hand and Ranger at my heels, I descended the narrow wooden stairs into the cramped basement. The smell hit immediately: old paper, older memories, and the faint sweetness of cedar dust. Against the far wall stood shelves stacked with boxes labeled in my grandfather's handwriting. Waterworks, property, surveys, taxes, old stuff. I pulled the box marked surveys off the shelf. Dust exploded into the air, making Ranger sneeze. Inside were rolled maps, brittle sketches, letters from county offices dated decades back. Some showed the lake in hand-drawn contour lines. Others were official parcels stamped by the assessor's office. I spread them across the workbench, flattening the edges with whatever I could reach. Tools, a jar of nails, a rusty lantern. My flashlight beam drifted over inked lines, measurements, notations in my grandfather's precise penmanship. Then I saw it. A thick, bound folder tucked beneath a stack of invoices and fishing licenses from the 70s. I pulled it out carefully. The cover read, "Cole Family Waters, Original Deed and Riparian Rights." My breath caught. Hands steady but heart pounding, I opened it. Inside lay the documents that mattered, signed, sealed, stamped by the county recorder. The lake outline was unmistakable, a shape I knew as well as my own reflection. And printed beside it, ownership, full lake surface, bed, shoreline access, and riparian rights granted to the Cole family, 1912. Not shared, not conditional, not community-owned, not HOA jurisdiction. My grandfather hadn't just owned the cabin. He had owned the lake. Every inch of water Bethany claimed to manage. Every ripple she said belonged to her HOA. Every buoy she accused me of placing illegally. All of it was Cole land, Cole water, Cole rights. I sank into the old wooden stool by the workbench, the weight of the discovery pressing into my chest like something solid and warm. Ranger rested his head on my knee, watching my face as if waiting for the next move. I reached for my phone and dialed the one person who would know what to do next. Sarah Mitchell answered on the second ring. "Remy? Everything okay?" "I found something," I whispered. "Something big." A pause. "What kind of something?" "The lake." "Sarah, the whole lake. My grandfather owned it. It's all recorded. Every piece. And Bethany's out there claiming it's HOA property." In the silence that followed, I could almost hear her gears turning, lawyer mode switching on. "Remy," she said finally, "she's enforcing rules on a lake she has zero legal claim to." "I know. You need to protect those documents. Don't let anyone near them. And whatever you do, don't react until we verify everything officially." I exhaled, a shaky mix of relief and determination. "Then what?" "Then," she said, her voice sharpening with purpose, "we show the community the truth, but on our terms, not hers." I closed the deed folder gently, as if it were a living thing. How do you expose a manipulator who controls the entire neighborhood's narrative? I didn't know yet, but I knew this. Bethany had built her authority on fear and falsified power, and I had something stronger: evidence. The next morning broke colder than usual, the kind of cold that seeped through flannel and into bone. Mist curled low over the turquoise lake, rolling across the surface like a slow breath. Ranger stood by the cabin door, ears tilted, sensing the tension in me before I even reached for the handle. Inside the basement, the deed folder sat exactly where I'd placed it the night before, sealed in a waterproof case I'd dug out from under an old tool bench. I'd spent hours studying every page, every signature, every county seal. The documents were undeniable, and more powerful than any HOA flyer or phony boundary flag. But raw evidence, I knew, wasn't enough, not when fear and rumor had already taken root. Sarah's voice echoed in my mind. "We show the community the truth, but on our terms." So I brewed a pot of coffee, opened my laptop, and began setting the plan in motion. First came the digital overlays. I scanned the lake surveys, careful not to crease the fragile edges, then aligned them with the modern county GIS maps. The outlines matched perfectly. The water boundaries had not changed in over a century. Every curve of shoreline, every slope beneath the surface belonged to my family. Then came aerial markers. Using my drone, the same model I used back when I inspected spillways, I flew it low over the lake, tracing the buoy line. The footage captured the exact alignment between my markers and the survey boundaries. Even at dawn, the lake shimmered like polished jade under the drone's camera, the buoys glowing orange against the teal water. Next came documentation. I printed sealed copies of the deed, the riparian rights, and the old letters from the county confirming water ownership. I slid each into a clear, protective sleeve. The stack of evidence grew until it felt like I was assembling a case file for a courtroom instead of a lakeside dispute. But that wasn't the trap. The trap was simpler, more psychological. A mirror for her behavior. I needed to confirm one thing. Was Bethany watching my property as closely as I suspected? So I staged a bait. I typed a few lines onto an old survey template. Nothing that meant anything legally. Just enough numbers and boundary notes to look plausible to someone who didn't understand surveying. Then, in the lower corner, I added a tiny, almost invisible pencil dot, a marker so faint it would only be discovered if someone picked up the paper and examined it closely. I printed it, rolled it casually, rubber banded it, then placed it on the porch table, and waited. Ranger and I sat inside, lights dimmed, blinds cracked. I wasn't proud of the surveillance, but sometimes the truth needed space to reveal itself. The lake outside glowed brighter as the sun rose. A breeze brushed the trees. A pickup rumbled by. Nothing. An hour passed. Then something shifted. Ranger froze, ears locked toward the gravel path. I followed his gaze. A figure moved between the trees, pink fabric flashing like a flare. Bethany. She stepped onto my porch the way a thief might approach a locked gate, quietly, cautiously, checking both directions. She glanced at the windows, then leaned over the table. Her eyes scanned the rolled document. She picked it up, unrolled it. Her nose nearly touched the page as she squinted. She saw the dot. She was close enough to see the dot, and that was all the evidence I needed. She rolled the paper back up and tucked it under her arm. Then she spun around and marched off the porch, nearly tripping over Ranger's water bowl in her haste. 2 hours later, she returned, with fury. She didn't knock. She stabbed the doorbell like she wanted to break it. When I opened the door, she thrust the fake survey toward me as if it were radioactive. "Explain this," she demanded. "What is it?" I asked calmly. "It's a forged survey," she snapped. "And it proves you're trying to create fraudulent documents to dispute HOA jurisdiction." I raised an eyebrow. "Forged? Did you get a court to confirm that?" Her face colored, eyes darting. "I don't need a court to see this is fake. You're trying to deceive the community." "I left that on my porch," I replied. "How did it end up in your hands?" She stared at me, lips parted, suddenly aware she'd revealed too much. It was in plain view." "On my private porch," I said quietly, "where you don't have authority to inspect or remove documents." Her jaw tightened. Ranger stepped beside me, tail stiff, gaze locked on her. She pointed a trembling finger at the dog. "Control your animal." "He's calm," I said, folding my arms. "You're the one shaking." Her breath hitched. "You think you can intimidate me? You took papers from my porch without permission. That's not intimidation. That's trespassing." Her cheeks flushed a deep red. She turned sharply, marching back up the gravel drive, shouting over her shoulder, "This is far from over, Mr. Cole. I have a lawyer." When she vanished into the trees, the air felt lighter. Ranger let out a satisfied huff and lay down in the patch of sunlight on the deck. But as relieving as the moment felt, it was only the first crack in her shield. She'd shown her hand. She was monitoring, watching, and willing to cross legal lines. The trap had sprung. That evening, I spread all the documents across my kitchen table again. The deed sat at the center, lit by the overhead bulb like a relic. The drone footage ran on my laptop, smooth and undeniable. In the window, the lake shimmered beneath the dusk sky, the surface darkening to a deep cobalt. I wasn't just defending a cabin now. I was defending my family's legacy. And the truth. If she reacted this fast to bait, how would she handle real evidence? The answer came sooner than I expected. By sunrise, my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "Today's the day. She's holding her final HOA boundary review at the community center. Bring everything." I stared out at the lake, its morning mist curling in silver ribbons across the water. Ranger nudged my hand, sensing the shift in my mood. My heartbeat had a rhythm to it, steady, determined, something like the quiet before a storm. I packed everything into a waterproof case: maps, deed, water rights documents, drone footage drive, aerial overlays. Each piece was a thread in the rope I planned to wrap around Bethany's fabricated authority until it had nowhere else to go. The community center sat on a ridge overlooking the marina, the early light glancing off the glass windows like watchful eyes. Cars lined the gravel lot. People streamed inside, some clutching clipboards, others holding those same HOA flyers that had painted me as a villain. I wasn't surprised to see them. Propaganda spreads like wildfire when fear is holding the match. Inside, the room buzzed with whispers. A projection screen was set up at the front. Rows of folding chairs filled the hall, each occupied by a neighbor who'd heard only her side of the story. The air held that charged hum of expectation, the kind you hear before a verdict. And at the center of it all stood Bethany Reed. Her bright pink dress caught the light, as if she wanted every camera, every eye to land on her. Her board members stood rigidly on either side of her like ornamental guards. The same lawyer from before arranged folders on a table, his expression confident, certain, rehearsed. Then she saw me. Her eyes narrowed into slits, but her lips curled into a saccharine smile. "Ah, Mr. Cole, you finally decided to participate in your own hearing." "My what?" I asked. "Your hearing," she repeated brightly, "to determine your eligibility for shoreline access and community compliance." Behind her, someone whispered, "About time he followed the rules." I ignored it. Ranger sat by my leg, steady as always. Bethany gestured grandly toward the podium. "Please take a seat. We'll begin shortly." I didn't sit. I walked to the back of the room where an outlet waited. I plugged in my projector and placed my laptop beside it. Sarah slipped in through the side door, giving me a tight nod. She looked calm, but the way she clutched her tablet suggested she was ready for battle. The meeting began with Bethany's voice ringing through the speakers. "Good morning, community. Today we finally address the ongoing violations committed by Mr. Remy Cole. He has refused to cooperate with HOA guidelines and continues to misuse our lake." Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the crowd. Then her lawyer stepped forward, flipping open a thick binder. "We have assembled photographic and testimonial evidence demonstrating Mr. Cole's obstruction of shared water access. The HOA requests full enforcement of shoreline restrictions, immediate removal of unauthorized structures, and suspension of dock use." The audience murmured louder now, some nodding, some frowning, a few staring at me as though I were about to confess to a crime. Bethany glanced at me with triumph. "Do you have anything to say before we proceed with enforcement action?" I stepped forward, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. "Yes, I do." Then I turned on the projector. A sharp beam of white light cut across the room, illuminating the giant screen behind her. The first image appeared, a crystal-clear drone shot of the lake, morning sunlight glinting off its surface. Audience murmurs quieted. I clicked to the next slide. The county GIS map, perfectly aligned to the drone's aerial photograph. Real survey coordinates, real legal boundaries. Gasps trembled through the hall. "This," I said, keeping my voice steady, "is the official county survey of the lake, confirmed by multiple filings over the last century. And this," I switched slides, "is the footage verifying every boundary line still matches those original surveys." Another click. The buoy line appeared, glowing orange against the deep teal water. "And these buoys?" I continued. "They align exactly with the property line owned by my grandfather. And now," click, "owned by me." The room went still. Not quiet, not hushed. Still. like time had briefly forgotten to move. Then Sarah stepped forward. We verified these documents with the recorder's office this morning. The lake is private property. It has always been private property. The HOA has no jurisdiction here. Bethany's face drained of color. Her lawyer blinked at the screen, flipping frantically through his binder as if hoping a missing page might save him. I clicked again. The deed appeared in vivid resolution, the county seal shining. The crowd leaned forward, a collective inhale. Every inch of this lake, assess, Iwo said, is owned by the Cole family. The water, the shoreline, the dock, everything you've been told is false. The lawyer closed his binder slowly. Bethany took a step back, shaking her head. This can't be right. These maps, these documents, they're forged. They must be. He's manipulating the data. Sarah held up her tablet. We confirmed everything directly with the county. Nothing is forged. A man in the crowd whispered, She lied. About all of it? Another voice added, What else has she been hiding? Gasps turned into questions. Questions into confusion. Confusion into anger. Bethany's breathing quickened. Her composure cracked, splintering like thin ice under weight. She looked from the audience to me, back to the audience, her lips trembling with words she couldn't quite form. Even her lawyer took 2 slow steps away from her, subtle, but noticeable. And just like that, the power she'd gripped so tightly slipped through her fingers like water. If she lied about the lake, what else has she been hiding? The room held its breath, a collective pause, neighbors frozen between disbelief and dawning anger. The kind of silence that comes when a truth too heavy to ignore finally lands. Then a soft voice broke through it. Excuse me, someone said from the 4th row. Heads turned. A woman stood, folding her hands together nervously, brown hair pulled back, posture careful but determined. Sophie Clark. I'd only met her once, briefly, but now she stepped into the aisle like someone walking toward a spotlight she never wanted but knew she had to face. She held a blue binder against her chest, thick, worn, the edges frayed from use. I think, she said, voice trembling but steadying with each word, there's something everyone needs to see. Bethany's head snapped around. Sophie, she hissed, sit down. This is not your place. But Sophie didn't sit. She walked toward the front, each footstep soft, but carrying a weight that rippled through the hall. When she reached me, she offered the binder with both hands. For months, she said, I kept records, real records, of the fees we were told to pay. For lake access, for dock maintenance, for emergency shoreline improvements. Things we were told were necessary. Things we were told you, she nodded at Bethany, were handling responsibly. A murmur rose through the room. Sophie opened the binder on the table beside my projector. Neat columns and dates filled the pages, each one labeled carefully. She turned another page. More numbers, more names, more payments. I work in bookkeeping, she continued, lifting her chin. And some of these charges never made sense to me, so I started tracking them. Every payment, every claimed expense. Bethany took a step forward. This is private HOA material. You are violating confidentiality? No, Sophie said firmly. You violated our trust. The room fell silent again. She flipped to a page marked in red. In the past 2 years, residents paid over $32,000 in lake fees alone. But according to county maintenance reports, no contractors were hired. No repairs were requested. No inspections occurred. A wave of shock rolled across the audience. Sophie turned another page, her finger landing on entries highlighted in orange. These dates, these supposed emergency meetings, you listed them on your HOA calendar, Bethany. Except, no one I spoke to attended them, and several were scheduled during times you were logged in at your job downtown. Gasps, whispers, a low voice from the back. She pocketed the money. Bethany's eyes widened. This is ridiculous. Anyone can fabricate numbers on a spreadsheet. Then explain this. Sophie pulled out printed screenshots, emails forwarded and saved. These are notices you sent from the HOA account claiming community-approved expenditures, but none of those approvals ever happened. Because, she glanced at the audience, we were never asked. The lawyer beside Bethany finally cleared his throat. Ms. Clark, do you have proof these emails came from the HOA leadership and not from... Sarah stepped forward, holding her tablet high. Already verified through server logs, all sent by Bethany Reed. A hiss of whispers spread like wildfire. Someone shouted, "She's been stealing from us!" Another voice, "Where did the money go?" Bethany shook her head violently. No, you don't understand. I was managing things. I was keeping the community running. You people have no idea how much work I've done behind the scenes. Behind the scenes, someone repeated bitterly, is right. Bethany's composure unraveled with each word. The pink dress that once made her look commanding now seemed loud, desperate, unraveling at its edges. She reached toward the binder like she might rip it apart, but Sophie stepped back firmly. I trusted you, Sophie said quietly. I defended you when others questioned your methods. But the numbers don't lie. And neither does the county. Sophie wasn't shouting. She didn't need to. Her truth cut cleaner than any raised voice. The sheriff, who had remained near the doorway, finally moved forward. His boots echoed across the wooden floor, his presence drawing attention instantly. Sheriff Marcus Hale had the calm, steady look of someone who'd seen disputes spiral into legal nightmares and knew exactly when a line had been crossed. Miss Reed, he said, I'm going to need you to step aside for a moment. Bethany shook her head. Sheriff, please. This is all being blown out of proportion. These people don't understand the administrative burdens I carry, the responsibilities, the decisions. Bethany, his tone stopped her cold. There are allegations here that warrant formal review. A neighbor stood, then another, then another. The crowd that once murmured in her favor now looked at her with betrayal carved plainly on their faces. Sophie closed the binder. We deserved honesty. You gave us invoices. The heat in the room changed, anger simmering beneath shock. But it wasn't directed at me anymore. It was directed at her. Bethany backed away, her breath shallow. This is mutiny. All of you. I kept this lake together. I managed everything. Her voice cracked, but the neighbors didn't move to comfort her. They moved away. Step by step, creating a widening space around her. Sheriff Hale placed a steady hand on her arm, not to restrain her, but to stop her collapse. We'll sort everything through county channels, he said. But for now, I think the community needs a moment without HOA leadership involved. Bethany swallowed hard. Her lips trembled. You're removing me? For now, the sheriff said simply. The crowd exhaled, one long breath of relief, disbelief, grief, and simmering justice. And as she was, guided toward the hallway, her heels tapping unevenly against the floor, I realized something. This wasn't just about a lake, or a dock, or a few boundary lines. This was a community waking up, and Bethany knew it. The hum of voices swelled behind her like a rising tide. Questions, accusations, the rustle of papers, the scrape of chairs, everything building into a storm of its own. For the first time since I'd moved back here, the noise wasn't aimed at me. It followed her. Sheriff Hale closed the side door behind them, leaving a stunned quiet in the hall. Neighbors stood in clusters, whispering urgently, glancing at me, glancing at each other, unsure of what came next. Sophie leaned against a table, arms wrapped around herself, as if coming down from a sprint. Sarah stepped to my side. She wasn't smiling. She rarely did during moments like this, but there was a sharpness in her eyes, the look of someone who knew the biggest domino had just fallen. But the fight wasn't over. Not yet. The sheriff re-entered after a minute, his face angled toward the floor, as if weighing the next steps carefully. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of official consequence. "All right, folks," he said, lifting a hand. "I've contacted the county attorney. An investigation is being opened into potential fraud, coercion, and financial misconduct." A ripple of shocked murmurs swept through the audience. He continued, "This includes unauthorized fee collection, fabricating authority, falsifying meeting minutes, and enforcing unlawful restrictions on private property." Someone in the third row let out a low whistle. Bethany's lawyer, who'd drifted toward the back like a man avoiding a sinking ship, finally lifted his briefcase. Without a word, he walked briskly toward the exit, not even looking in Bethany's direction. His departure was louder than any argument. I heard someone mutter, "Even her own lawyer won't stand by her." The sheriff turned to me. "Mr. Cole, thank you for providing the documentation. The county will need certified copies, but what you've shown today is substantial." I nodded. The room felt warm, almost too warm, from the bodies packed shoulder to shoulder. But inside me, something cold and grounded held steady. Bethany's empire, built on fear, rules, and fake authority, was collapsing. And then the moment came. She returned. Or rather, she stormed back. The double doors slammed open so hard they rattled the hinges. Bethany stood there, pink dress wrinkled, hair slightly out of place, eyes blazing with a fury so sharp it looked like it could cut through metal. "This is ridiculous!" she shrieked, voice cracking. "I built this community. I kept order. I made sure everyone followed standards. You people wouldn't last a day without me." The crowd recoiled. Sophie pressed a hand to her chest. Even Ranger, lying near my feet, lifted his head and gave a low grumble. Bethany's heels clacked aggressively as she stormed down the aisle toward me. "You!" she spat. "You think you can waltz back here with your fishing pole and your mutt and just take everything I built? You don't deserve that lake. You don't deserve any of it." Her words hit the air like sparks on dry leaves. The sheriff stepped quickly between us, one hand raised. "Bethany, that's enough." She didn't stop. "He is the problem, not me. He refuses the HOA, refuses the rules, refuses to pay like everyone else. He undermined me. Bethany!" The sheriff's voice boomed, firm enough to silence even the most stubborn argument. "You need to calm down." But she didn't. She pointed a trembling finger at me, inches from my chest. "You stole authority from me." And it hit me then, clearer than any document. She wasn't angry because she'd been caught. She was angry because she lost power. "All of this," I said quietly, "started because I wouldn't sign your paperwork." She flinched at the simplicity of it. Sheriff Hale exhaled sharply. "Ms. Reed, please step aside." His voice softened, not with sympathy, but with a warning. "The county investigation is already underway. Don't make this harder." Her face twisted. "You're taking his side?" "I'm taking the side of the law," he said. Her fury crumpled into disbelief. She looked around, searching the room for support, for someone, anyone, to step toward her. No one did. Not one neighbor. Not one board member. Not one friend. Bethany stumbled back a step, and for a moment her expression flickered, fear replacing rage. Then the sheriff pulled out the paperwork he'd brought in from the hallway. "Ms. Reed, the county requires your signature acknowledging the investigation and relinquishing any claim to HOA authority over this lake or its shoreline, effective immediately." The room fell so silent I could hear the faint hum of the projector cooling down. Bethany stared at the documents like they were a death sentence. Her shoulders trembled. "I won't sign that." "Then the county will escalate," the sheriff said plainly, "and the penalties will be far more severe." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, with her hand shaking, she grabbed the pen. Each stroke of her signature cut through the paper like a small surrender. Neighbors watched, the weight of relief settling over them like fresh air after a storm. She set the pen down with a trembling clatter. "You're all ungrateful," she whispered. "I tried to keep control because someone had to." But the room wasn't listening anymore. The sheriff gathered the signed forms. Board members quietly removed the HOA banner from the front table. Two neighbors began taking down the community water rules sign Bethany had hung at the entrance. Her false crown, her invented kingdom, was unraveling piece by piece. Finally, the sheriff turned to me. "We'll need your cooperation moving forward," he said. "But for today, this chapter is closed." As if on cue, the dock gate, her gate, that she'd ordered installed weeks ago was carried in by two neighbors. They leaned it against the wall, a symbol of everything she'd tried to control. The metal frame clanged softly as it settled. Bethany stared at it with a hollow expression. The queen had fallen, and her throne was gone. In the days that followed, the community center, once the stage for her authority, became something entirely different. The HOA banner that had hung above the podium was folded away like a relic of a past no one wanted to revisit. Neighbors gathered not out of obligation or fear, but out of relief and a cautious sense of renewal. The county attorney sent officials to my cabin that next week. They asked calm, methodical questions, photographed documents, and left with boxes of evidence. Sophie's ledger, email logs, meeting minutes Bethany had fabricated, and fee records that showed a pattern too blatant to deny. Every time I opened the door for them, Ranger sat proudly at my side, as if he'd appointed himself guardian of the lake's rightful story. Meanwhile, the community began to shift like a thawing river. People waved when they drove by my cabin now. Some even stopped to introduce themselves properly, offering pies, casseroles, awkward apologies, or simple nods that said, "We got it wrong." I didn't hold it against them. Fear does strange things to people, and Bethany had been good at weaponizing it. But the lake was mine to protect. And now, finally, everyone understood why it mattered. It was a bright Saturday morning when we gathered at the marina to finalize the new agreement. The sun cast warm gold over the water, turning the turquoise surface into a sheet of living glass. Colorful boats bobbed lightly against their moorings. The cabins around the shore gleamed like they had shaken off months of tension. Inside the pavilion, folding tables were arranged neatly. Coffee steamed in paper cups. Kids chased each other between the benches, their laughter echoing off the wooden beams. It was the first time in a long time this place felt like a community instead of a courtroom. Sarah stood beside me, reviewing the new documents one last time. She was calm, collected, and sharp-eyed as ever. "Once this is signed," she said, tapping the final page, "there's no going back. This will become part of every property record around the lake." "That's the idea," I said. Sophie approached, hands clasped in front of her. "I still can't believe it's over," she said softly. Then, with more confidence, "Actually, I can't believe we let it go on that long." "You helped end it," I told her. "Your records did." She smiled shyly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I guess numbers do tell the truth, eventually." Sheriff Hale arrived to oversee the final signatures. Not because it was legally required, but because people trusted him now more than anyone else. He nodded to me in that quiet way he had. Good to see things settling. Feels different, I said. Better. He glanced toward the water. That lake always had a way of showing folks who they really are. Maybe that was true. Water reflects everything. Light, sky, mistakes, truths. The meeting began with small speeches, not grand ones, not dramatic, but honest and human. People talked about wanting transparency, fairness, cooperation. They talked about apology and healing. Some even talked about Bethany, not with hatred, but with disappointment, the kind that comes when someone you trusted shows you a side you never saw before. Then came the signing. The new agreement was simple: a voluntary community fund, open meetings with rotating oversight, clear records accessible to all, no mandatory fees, no false authority. And most importantly, lake access for all residents, protected by law, without coercion or control. When I added my name to the list, the room let out a warm, collective breath, like we had all crossed some invisible threshold together. Outside, as the crowd dispersed, children ran toward the water. Adults followed, laughing, carrying coolers, laying towels on the docks. A few boats pushed away from the shore, engines humming softly over the lake. I walked down to my curved wooden dock, Ranger trotting ahead, tail high, and sat at the edge where the sunlight shimmered beneath my boots. The breeze carried the scent of pine, the soft splash of oars, the distant chatter of neighbors finally unburdened. The lake felt alive again, a place not of conflict, but of return. Sarah sat beside me. "Your grandfather would have been proud," she said. I smiled. He loved this lake more than anything. He always said water keeps stories. Maybe that's why everything surfaced when it did. She nodded thoughtfully. Truth has a way of rising. I leaned back on my palms, watching the ripples spread outward in gentle circles. It still surprises me how close we came to losing all of it. How easily people can give away what they don't realize is theirs. Or fight for it, she said, once someone reminds them it is. Ranger nudged my hand, and I rubbed behind his ears as he settled beside me, his reflection wavering on the shimmering surface below. The afternoon sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering across the lake like diamonds tossed into water, and I felt it, an easing inside my chest. The weight of months lifting, replaced by something steady, something grateful. The lake was whole again. The people were free again. And I had become the steward my grandfather hoped I'd be. I stood, looking out across the turquoise expanse, and said softly, "To the water, to the trees, to whoever needed to hear it now. Truth doesn't shout. It just waits for someone stubborn enough to uncover it." If this story hit home for you, drop a simple yes in the comments, or a justice, if you've ever had to stand your ground against someone abusing their authority. Stories like this remind us that truth doesn't always shout, but it always matters. And if you'd like to ride along for more HOA, ranch, and land justice tales, feel free to stick around and subscribe. There's plenty more coming down the trail.